what kind of advice do you have on testing in a development environment so that you're sure you're not actually going to be running into scalability issues as you start going into production? I think, Barry, the next slide is actually yours.
Yeah, well, there are obviously lots of things you can do. You can have a staging environment, you can run benchmarks against that, you can monitor page load times, you can do all these sorts of things. But one thing I really wanted to focus on, which is actually a relatively new plugin for WordPress, is called the debug bar plugin. So as of WordPress 3.1, there's a bar built in to the top of your WordPress site that displays some various information. If you install this debug bar, you will get another little link on the top right that says debug, and it displays all this really cool information that you can run in your development and staging environment, and it will flag potential problems. So obviously the information that it displays is kind of displayed on the bottom. It says what you queried, what it was, what page template it's using, and then if you click on all these different tabs, it'll show you how many queries and what the queries were that were generated to use that page. If you're using any deprecated functions, it will flag those for you. If you're generating any PHP errors, it'll flag those for you, and it flags them visually for you so you can see. It also shows you things like how many, if you have an object cache, a persistent object cache, it'll show you how many objects were queried from the cache, how many were written to the cache, how many were read from the cache. So you can use this while in development and in staging to actually figure out if you're going to have any obvious performance issues. So it's a really cool plugin, and I would suggest running it on all of your sites, even if you're not actually doing testing. It's really cool to kind of see what's going on behind the scenes.
When you're building these sites, right, you go and you download these free plugins from these open source developers around the world. And when they went to sell it, they probably got paid by a client, or they did it because they were passionate. And there was a certain set of parameters that fit in with that. And so what happens, though, is you start downloading this plugin, that plugin, and you're not really sure which direction your site's going. And pretty soon, you got a site full of all these different plugins from all these different developers. And maybe it's been a year, maybe it's been 6 months or whatever. And next thing you know, boom, you get linked from HuffPo, or you get linked from something, or marketing sent out an email to 25,000 people and forgot to mention it to you, and your site melts down, right? And this is the fear that everybody has, is that their best opportunity to monetize their site and really showcase, they suffer. So there are lots of good companies out there that can help you with this. This is a service that we use for all the Drupal sites we host, called Sosta, and basically what they're doing is they just increase the load, and then they tell you basically where it's going to peter out. And I think with all these plugins that you're downloading, you know, maybe somebody thought that 25,000 visitors in a day was a really good thing, and you know, for a programmer, maybe that is a really good thing. But if you happen to hit 26,000, you know, your site could go down. So you should know where your limits are before you start, and you can use some tools. Eric's going to talk a little bit about that, but you can also get external services. And if you're setting that benchmark for your site at 50 million or 100 million, make sure you test it in advance and get it early in your development cycle.
Unfortunately, we learned a bit the hard way about the importance of performance testing. To Barry's point, we thought we could hardware our way out of a problem, and that didn't work. We did find some, you know, core things in Drupal that we had to fix. When we started this in 2008, based on our volume of traffic, we would have been one of the largest, if not the largest, I think, Drupal sites at the time. And we did run into some problems that we wound up fixing in collaboration with the community, and also by backporting some of the things from Drupal 7, because they had addressed some of these issues. And I won't get into too many details. They were around kind of locking strategies on kind of vulnerable parts of Drupal that were subject to database stampedes. But as a result of that, we spent quite a bit of time, and we used a tool called the Grinder. And how we used that at first was to do what Keiran was doing with his cloud test, which was to ramp up until we broke the site, or ramp up until we saw the vulnerabilities come in, and then address those. You know, someone once compared, it's the Disney theme park effect. If you've only got one gate open, you're going to have a long queue at the gate, but once you get in, they're relatively short queues. If you open up the gates, you're going to get a lot of people in, and all the queues are going to line up, so you have to address them in that fashion. What we did is we created a bunch of tests with something called the Grinder, and what we do is on a build basis, before going into production, we're testing, and what we're looking for is the mean test time to be relatively flat. We've gone into a relatively heavy period of development, so you'll see this go up and you go down. Looks like we got a little better. But we're really kind of addressing kind of the core back-end functionality, so you've seen standard deviation going up. But on a build basis, we want this line to be relatively flat. So when we do a major rollout, we ramp it up again, and we see, if it bends, it's funny. If it breaks, it's not. So we want to see at what point it breaks. And it's given us a lot of confidence in that we haven't had any real kind of performance-related rollbacks. We've introduced bugs, but that's another issue. But it's worked very well for us. And if you click to the next slide, you can see what the tests are made up of. I think we have 30 to 40 use cases that we test, and we test the whole stack from the caching to Apache down to the database.